It's still only January of 2024 and we are already riding our second 400cc bike of this year. Say hello to the all-new Husqvarna Svartpilen 401. Now this Husky is based on the all-new Generation 3 KTM 390 Duke, but Husqvarna has given it a few bespoke elements to make sure that the quintessential Husqvarna riding experience comes through. Now whether or not that is the case is something we're going to be finding out over the course of this video. So without further ado, welcome to our first ride review of the all-new Husqvarna Svartpilen 401. And before we proceed, if you like this video, do make sure you give us a thumbs up, share this video with like-minded enthusiasts, and make sure you smash that bell icon to stay notified for all things thrill of riding. Now the Husqvarnas, they were always really good looking motorcycles, a little polarizing but always really nice to look at. The Swedish lines and cuts, they made for really beautiful looking motorcycles. But when the 250s came in India, they didn't really do well, and one of the major reasons for that was just how small it was. Not just how small it was as a bike, but also very cramped for the rider. That meant that not many riders could get them, especially those who were on the larger side. And that's exactly what they've aimed to fix with this generation of the Husqvarna's Svartpilens and Vitpilens. This is the Svartpilen 401. That's the only one available in the 400cc category. So let's take a look at this for now. So the design, it stays pretty much the same in the sense that this is very distinctly a Husqvarna. It has all the same lines, cuts and creases and the very flat design. But Husqvarna says that this bike has grown by around 20% in width, in height. Even the seat is more roomy by around 20% is the number they're telling us. So to that end, you still get that nice circular round headlight in the front, pretty large. It now gets this little fly screen behind it. And if you move behind, you have a nice and wide handlebar, very similar to that of the Duke. And as you see, the switch cubes are also just like the same as found on the 390 Duke. If you look behind, the screen is also the same as the one found on the 390 Duke, but the layout and the whole setting of the screen is bespoke to this Husqvarna. Now moving behind, you have the same tank, which is now larger again. From 9.5, this can hold up to 13.5 liters of fuel. You also get this mount for putting a tank bag or something of the sort. Now after you finish with the tank, it flows seamlessly into the seat, and the seat, it comes all the way up to the top over here. So it's padded over here as well. So on a sudden hard braking, you can make sure that your family should be safe, if you get what I mean. Now moving behind, the seat is pretty large, it's roomy, and even for a rider like me, there's enough space to move forward and backward, and the seat coming up all the way till here helps in making it feel like a larger seat than it actually is. And if you look at the foot pegs, now they are the same as the KTM 390 Duke, but they feel a little more relaxed in the sense that it's a nicer place to be for longer distances. It's more comfortable in that sense, but it's not really lazy either, so it doesn't come in the way of your handling. As you can see, the side is not filled with exhaust that in my opinion didn't really go with the design of the bike. So this has an underbelly exhaust, again like the 390 Duke. And if you come to the rear, it now gets spoked wheels. These are still tubed wheels, but it is spoked, unlike the previous Svartpilen which had alloys. And overall, I feel like this looks like a pretty handsome motorcycle, especially in this color scheme as well, with the little yellow accents here and there. So this definitely is a looker, and Husqvarna's claims of this being a larger motorcycle do translate in the real world as well. But what do you think about the design of this bike? Do let us know in the comment section down below. This is the first time we're getting a bigger 401 Husqvarna in India, and for now we're getting only the Svartpilen 401, and powering it is the same engine that does duties on the Gen 3 390 Duke from KTM. And if you have seen my review of that bike, you know that I really love this engine. And Husqvarna has done the wise thing of not tinkering around with it at all. So this engine, it comes in the absolutely same state of tune. It doesn't get any changes internally. The mapping is all the same. And from what Husqvarna tells us, even the sprocketing is identical to that of the 390 Duke, which in my opinion is a great thing. So before I go about telling you what this engine is like, let's have a quick listen and refresh your mind on what this engine sounds like. So that is what this new single cylinder sounds like. In my opinion, it sounds quite grunty and quite nice, and especially when you're riding, it sounds a lot better than it does when it is at standstill. Now in terms of performance, like I said, Husqvarna hasn't changed anything. So you get the same 44 bhp at 8,500 rpm and 39 newton meters of torque at 6,500 rpm, and this is a very tractable motor compared to what we are used to from a KTM engine in general. So it's very easy to ride, it's very forgiving and very rewarding, and a lot of fun to ride really hard and fast, and that character comes through on this bike as well. In terms of weight, this bike has gone up a few kilos compared to the Duke, but that's barely felt in the way it performs, and that's a great thing. So you still have a nice, fun, potent engine mated to the same 6-speed gearbox. You also get the quick shifter as standard over here, which I feel works a little better on this bike than it does on the Duke, although the parts aren't really different, but it just feels a little more easier to use even at half revs or if you're not really gunning it. The thing about the KTM 390 Duke's quick shifter was that it worked really well, especially if you're keeping the throttle pinned, but when you're keeping the throttle slightly open or if you're trying to use a quick shifter at slower speeds, it didn't feel as responsive. It felt a little clunky, and it was also very sensitive, so the second your foot touches the lever, power just gets cut. That seems like it's been sorted over here, and it feels a lot better to use in a more diverse set of conditions. So in that front, the whole experience is very similar to the KTM 390 Duke, even in terms of refinement, pretty refined. Cruising speeds, you can easily sit at 110-120 kilometers per hour all day, and this new larger bike with the larger ergonomics just makes for a bike that's more easy to extract this performance from. So I feel like they've done a great job with the ergonomics and making the bike bigger, and using this engine was a great choice. Even the braking performance is pretty solid. There's a slight bit of fade over the course of riding, but not detrimental in any way to the braking performance, and overall the braking performance is great, barring my only gripe that I said that the ABS, it feels a little too intrusive sometimes. So if that was sorted, I feel like the braking performance of this bike is also pretty good. Not as good as the 390 Duke with the new discs, but pretty close. Now, like I said earlier, the Husqvarna has grown. It has become a larger bike. By around 20% is what Husqvarna is selling us. And as you can see, I'm not dwarfing the bike. You can still see a lot of the bike even around me. That wasn't the case with the previous generation of the Husqvarna Svartpilen or the Vitpilen in the 250s. And that's a really good thing. As you can see, I'm sitting in riding position. The ball of my feet are on the foot peg, and it's roomy enough where I'm not really making contact with the pillion foot peg. My riding position on top is a pretty nice commanding upright position. I'm reaching to a set of nice and wide handlebars, and the overall position also is you're not really canted forward like you would be on the Duke slightly, and especially not like a Fed Super Sport. And the overall riding position is one that's very comfortable. And one thing to note is that this is a slightly taller bike by default. This seat height, it stands at 820 mm, unlike the Duke, which is at 800 mm now, and this has gone down from the previous generation of the Svartpilen by around 20-25 mm, but at the same time it creates a little more room between your bums and your legs. That just makes for a more comfortable riding experience. Now in terms of the chassis setup, you have essentially the same chassis as the 390 Duke. So the same front suspension, the same rear suspension, the same frame as well. What is different is the rear subframe. Now bear in mind, this is the Svartpilen, which is the Scrambler of the lineup, and to that end, to make it more robust, to make it more off-road focused, they have given it a slightly different subframe, not the aluminium one that you find on the 390 Duke. That has essentially been done to make it more strong, and even in the case of a crash, it should be able to take a little more damage than the aluminium one would. As you can also see, this uses spoked wheels, and the brake discs are also different. They are not the weight-saving brake discs that you find on the 390 Duke or the RC390 for that matter. Both front and rear, you have spoked wheels, the different brake discs. But apart from that, the chassis is pretty much identical to the 390 Duke. And what does that mean for you and me is that this is also a really good handler. Now bear in mind, this is not as sharp as the 390 Duke. If I were to place this in the Bajaj range of bikes right now, I would place this in between the Triumph Speed 400 and the 390 Duke. This feels a smidge sportier than the Speed 400 maybe, but not nearly as sporty as the 390 Duke, and that's a really good thing because you get to have that 390 Duke engine in a slightly more relaxed package. And as far as off-roading is concerned, now this still does get 177 mm of ground clearance, which is much more than it did on the 250 Svartpilen, but it is still not something you'd associate with an off-roading motorcycle. That being said, this new suspension that KTM has and even this bike has is just so good, and the fact that it is adjustable for rebound and compression up ahead and preload and damping behind makes you able to customize the riding experience to your liking. And with how good the damping on the suspension is by default, you can go a fair bit off-road. Now of course the stand-up riding position is not the best thing in the world, but it's not the worst either. And like I said, the suspension is good enough that you can sit and ride for the most part. Adding to the Scrambler theme of this motorcycle, you have really good tires. You have the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STRs, and they're great tires. You have good grip off-road, but at the same time the road performance is not nearly as compromised. So as you can see in the shots that will come up around this time, the bike corners really well. It holds the grip even near the edge of the tire. It holds grip really well, and at the same time when you come off-road you get a lot of traction. So we're here riding in loose mud and dirt, and the bike holds traction pretty well. Now in terms of the electronics, this gets ABS and traction control, but unlike the Duke, this is not IMU based. So you get ABS, which can be switched off at the rear as you would with a supermoto mode, and you also have traction control which can be on or off. Now this doesn't work in the cornering function because it doesn't have an IMU. So that being said, the traction control, once you switch it off, it doesn't intervene. As of course you switch it off, it doesn't intervene, but when it's on, you can't come off-road and expect to have a good time because the traction control will keep cutting in, and even if you gas it a little too much in the corners, even when you know what you're doing, the traction control has a tendency to intervene a little. So that is something I'm not too fond of. Even the ABS, I don't know whether it is not calibrated enough for off-road or maybe because the tires are such. ABS, I feel like it intervenes a little too soon. So that is something I'd like if it was rectified, maybe with a slightly softer map. But apart from that, the entire ride and handling setup is really great. In terms of cornering, like I said, you have a pretty nice riding and handling experience. The suspension is great. It deals with undulations really well. Small potholes and stuff, they barely mean anything to the suspension because it just gobbles it up and spits it out like it was nothing. So in that front, you have a really nice bike and a really nice option with the Svartpilen 401, because like I said, if you don't want something as committed as the Duke, but you still want something that can handle pretty much most of it, this is a great option. And it's a great option primarily because of the chassis setup and that sweet engine. Now let's talk about the electronics of this motorcycle. Now this is not nearly as comprehensive as the KTM 390 Duke, and by that I mean that this still does get ABS and traction control, but like I said earlier, these are not IMU based, so they're not lean sensitive. You can still switch ABS off in the rear and you can switch traction control off altogether, but there is no lean function to that. Apart from that, you don't get multiple ride modes, you just get the one street riding mode. Bluetooth connectivity, which enables things like connecting your phone and turn-by-turn navigation, is an optional extra, so that's not baked into the standard ex-showroom price of the bike. And barring that, you have a slightly different layout for the screen, and the rest of the switch cubes and all are pretty much the same as the 390 Duke, and so is the instrument cluster. And the other features that you get on this are the speed limiter and the ability to customize these buttons and change the layout ever so slightly. So it's very similar to the 390 Duke, but not as comprehensive an electronic package, but that is fine. The only thing I would have liked is if it had cornering ABS as well. I can do without cornering traction control, and I'm also fine with the fact that I can switch it off, so that's okay. But if this had cornering ABS, that would be just a touch better. But then again, you are paying less for this than the Duke, so I guess it's not too much of a complaint. So what do I make of this all-new Husqvarna Svartpilen 401? Well, to be honest, there's really not much to not love about this motorcycle. The engine and chassis setup we already love from the 390 Duke, but Husqvarna has added its own elements to make it a bit more like the Scrambler it intends to be. The tires, they're really good at adding the duality to the whole purpose of this motorcycle. You can get it a fair bit off-road, and the road performance is pretty good too. Apart from that, you do miss out on a few electronics that the 390 Duke benefits from. But when you look at the whole thing as a single package, and you also take into account that this costs rupees 2.92 lakh ex-showroom, which is almost 18,000 less than the 390 Duke, this makes for a really good deal. And the fit and finish is also pretty good, as KTM and Bajaj and now Husqvarna have been upping their game over the last couple of years. Fit and finish is great. So the overall package, it comes and ties in together to make for a really good motorcycle. And what's the best part is there is yet one more choice for us to choose from in this 400cc segment, and this one is a very competent choice at that. So what do you think about the Husqvarna 401 Svartpilen? Do let me know in the comment section down below, and thanks for watching.